Oh, they're on the table. Yes, sorry. Sorry, they're on the table. Yeah. Okay. Okay, good evening. So, welcome to week one of a three-part series on the great Torah commentators. I taught something, another series, I guess, of this sort, I think 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago. We did Rashi, Ramban, the Nitziv, and maybe Royer, I don't know, somebody of that sort. That was 2 years ago. So we're doing another three-part series. This time we're doing the Malbim, and then the Chassam Sofer, and then we're doing the Chamalevitz. Okay, so it's a little all over the place, but hopefully each of these individuals can teach us something, and we can learn something about, you know, their scholarship, who they were. Malbim, incredible person, led a very dramatic, incredible life. Born in 1809, studied in Wallonia, Warsaw, and Lechia. I don't know if that's saying that right. 1839 becomes rabbi in Reschen, which is in Posen. Posen's in Prussia, something like that. Okay, I think. Then he becomes a rabbi in Kempen. Kempen, that was a very, which is in Prussia, that was a very sort of important time in his career. At the time when he's a rabbi in Kempen, this is the emergence of the Reform movement in Central Europe. And the Malbim becomes a very outspoken opponent of Reform. He shared a characteristic of many rabbis who overestimate the influence of rabbis. He thought that if Jews are abandoning traditional observance and embracing a more modern lifestyle, it must be because their rabbis are telling them that it's okay. And so he saw the destruction of traditional Jewish society as being the fault of the ideologues of the early Reform movement, and therefore, sort of did intellectual battle with them, and saw that as being really crucial to protecting traditional life. This is like ground zero for the erosion of traditional Jewish life. Now, an alternative historical narrative would say that there were much broader forces in Western Europe and Central Europe undermining traditional Jewish society, and as emancipation spread to the East in the coming 50 years, that those forces were at play in Eastern, would come to play in Eastern Europe as well. Waves and waves of baptism, Jews, voluntarily renouncing Judaism as their, and seeing baptism as their entry ticket into all the good things that, Christianity had to offer. The Reform movement is a reaction to that. The Reform movement didn't cause any of that. The Reform movement is a reaction to the erosion of traditional society, to massive Jewish voluntary, intentional assimilation. And the Reform movement was a way to say, no, you can actually be modern and also still be Jewish. And this is a way to have a sophisticated philosophy, a sophisticated lifestyle, to be cultured, not to be backward in your religious lifestyle, but you don't have to throw out everything. Judaism still has ideals that are still relevant, and don't have to be ashamed of. And that was the argument. That was what Reform was trying to do. But I think a lot of traditional rabbis saw, again, I think if you're an intellectual, you overestimate maybe the influence of intellectuals, and so you see, okay, it's these Reform rabbis who are advocating these changes, they're the cause of this massive changes we're seeing. But again, just to remember, even the overwhelming majority of, let's see, we studied this together, again, a year or two ago, famous tshuva by the Orach Lanier in when was it? When did he write this tshuva? It's in the 1860s or 1870s, I forget the year. Between 1860 and 1875, he writes this very, very, very famous tshuva in which he is sort of, bemoaning the fact that the majority of Jews in Altona were no longer Sabbath observant in a traditional context by 1875. A generation later, Tzvi Hoffman writes about how in Berlin, Orthodox Jews were a fringe minority, that we were the separatists, we were the deviants from standard custom, and so okay, anyway. But inspired by this, by this sense that again, reform was a danger, was a threat, was undermining traditional Jewish life, he writes and is active as a public intellectual, as a leader, as a writer, as a polemicist against reform. So he ends up being imprisoned because of this. Moses Montefiore has to get him freed from prison. Things got very ugly. You think things are bad now, they were really ugly back then because the recriminations were really sort of back and forth. In some places, depending on who had the upper hand, and who had, like there were times in Prussia which had, when the government was very conservative, there were Orthodox factions that were close to the government who could say that the reform are elements of heresy and they're undermining tradition, et cetera, et cetera. When the Reform were dominant, they were able to imprison Orthodox leaders for impeding progress and social integration, and they're undermining government policy towards the advancement of the Jews and economic development, and they're standing in the way, and not standing in the way, they're actively impeding government policy of economic development by telling Jews not to work on Shabbos, keep your stores closed, don't send your kids to these government schools, et cetera, et cetera. So things were really bad. In particular, the Malbim's devotion to kashrut, that was understood to impede social solidarity and integration in Romania. 1858 becomes chief rabbi of Romania. That's where things got really bad for him. So the claim was, again, what was the claim? The Prime Minister of Romania attacked the Malbim for, quote, publishing libelous letters against those eating meat from any butcher shop, and he has preached against the idea of progress and freedom. Okay, so he probably did not preach against the idea of progress and freedom, but I'm sure he did preach against eating meat from any butcher shop. And again, if you're trying to develop your country economically, and you have somebody saying you can't eat from these butcher shops, that causes, that could be a problem. So he went to Constantinople, because I guess the Turkish government was overseeing Romania at that period of time, to try to intervene. That didn't work. He leaves Romania in 1864. I think that's when I think he was in prison actually in Constantinople as he's intervening against the Romanian government. You go against the prime minister. You gotta, you know what I mean? Like you gotta play to win. You don't. The mentor who said you can't. If you're the rabbi of the community, you can't lose any battle. So pick your fights well, because you can't lose anything without undermining your whatever. So he lost, and Montefiore got him out of prison on condition that he leave Romania. So he leaves Romania. Then he serves in Lechia, Kherson, Mogilev, and there too, this is the quote from this Encyclopedia Judaica entry, persecuted by the assimilationists, the Maskilim, and the Hasidim. So everyone, all these forces of Jewish modernity are attacking him from all sides, and no peace. He was invited to Mainz. He stops off in Königsberg, remains there for 4 years. 1879, he dies in Kiev on his way to accept a rabbinic position in Kremenchug in Poltava Oblast. No idea where that is. Kiev was on the way. He died there. So as a communal figure, really a lot of instability, a lot of turmoil, involved in controversy throughout his career. Never stayed in one post for very long. But he wrote a ton. He was very prolific as a writer. I mentioned, as I was preparing this afternoon to teach, I said to Sarah, "Oh, he wrote so much." But he never could keep a job, and she said, "Well, yeah, it's hard to keep a job when you're writing so much, It's not. There are rabbis who are very famous for their amazing sermons, and they're scholars who are respected, internationally. But sometimes that comes at the expense of the baby kissing, whatever things that gets the job stability. So that was not the dynamic for him. For him, it was real controversy. This was again ground zero in this. These battles, ideological battles that were tearing the Jewish community apart, and he was right in the midst of it. So this is not his full bibliography. Just some, 1845 publishes a commentary on Megillat Esther. 1849 commentary on Isaiah. 1860 commentary to the Sifra, which we'll say more about that in a moment. 1860 also a commentary to Shir Shirim, Song of Songs. Between 1867 and 1876 he completes the entire commentary to Tanakh. Chumash and Tanakh. So it's a pretty significant endeavor. Not too many people have written a commentary on all of Tanakh. While also being involved in affairs of the community. 1837, he publishes part 1 of Artzot Chaim, which is like Hidushim to Shulchan Aruch. 1838, Artzot HaShalom, which are 9 drashot. 1861, second part of Artzot HaChaim. 1904, he's no longer alive. The Elim Trufa is published, printed on Rambam's Hilchot Deot. 1938, 1966, Yalkut Shlomo on the Talmud. 1882, Eretz Chemda, another collection of sermons, and a few others as well, a few other essays and little books that he writes. So that's so very, very prolific, and he wrote not just like a commentary on Rambam's Hilchot Deot, like he writes about philosophy and character. He writes Chidushim on the Shulchan Aruch, commentary on law, commentary on Talmud, on Agadah, the Aggadic sections of the Talmud he writes about as well. Again, there's Perish on all the different sections of Tanakh, which is, to write a Perish on, like anybody can write a Perish on Sefer Shemot, but to write a Perish on Shir Shirim or Sefer Yirmiyahu, that requires a different type of breadth of knowledge, and in which he was. He really, tremendous, broad thinker.
These dates are when they were published?
Yes. Okay. Biography. So part 3. A major theme in his writing, and which he saw as core to his battle with reform, was the notion of the unity of the oral Torah and the written Torah. Okay, this is something I've spoken about before, in fact, relatively recently on a Wednesday night, but I'm going to say it again because it's really core to what he did, and not all of you were here, and I'll say it one more time because he represents a real extreme in this dynamic. So we have the written Torah, we have Chumash, and we have the oral Torah. We have the non-written part of the Torah, and this distinguishes Rabbinic Judaism and what becomes Rabbinic Judaism from all the other versions of Judaism that are circulating in the Second Temple period in the ancient world. Rabbinic Judaism is distinguished by its belief in this oral Torah, not just the written Torah, but the oral Torah as well. However, there is a wide range of ways in which Jews over the ages have understood the oral Torah and its origins and its relationship to the written Torah. Meaning, was at one end of the spectrum, you could advocate and say, the oral Torah, the non-written Torah, was also revealed in a comprehensive way to Moshe at Sinai, along with the written Torah. So God gave Moshe, here's this book, and also for the next 40 days, let me teach you lots of laws that you're going to pass down orally to your students, and they to their students, and they to the students, until eventually it all got codified and presented and edited in the year 200. Let's say Yehuda Nasi edits the Mishnah. So the Mishnah and all of the oral Torah that it contains is just the written record of the transmission after many generations of a message that was given from Moshe to Moshe from God. The advantage of this understanding, religiously, meaning maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but just the pragmatic advantage of this point of view is that our oral Torah, which is actually how we live, that's what describes and delineates and defines our lifestyle, the way we do mitzvot. With this understanding, it also goes back to God. And so if somebody says to you, why do you wait between meat and dairy, or why do you not eat dairy and meat together? Say the Torah. Torah says, Torah says, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. Where do you get this, not eating dairy and meat together? That's not what the words of the Torah say. So we can say, no, the meaning of that is contained in the oral Torah, which also comes from God and gave it to Moshe. So there's a niceness to be able to say this all came from God too. The disadvantage religiously of that sort of perspective on the oral Torah is it's then very hard to make sense of what on earth is the Talmud doing, and the Midrashim, which devote tremendous amount of energy and time to figuring out, it says this here, it says that there, we put it together, this is what it means, etc., and we end up with, it says 3 times in the Torah, lo tivashal gedi b'chei levimo, don't boil it 3 times, 1 time for this, 1 time for that, don't cook them together, don't eat them together. If they've been cooked together, don't try to benefit from them once they've been cooked together. That's what these 3 occasions of this phrase mean, and we expand it to include all meat and all dairy, not just a kid with its own mother's milk. So that the Talmud is filled with derivations and the Midrash Halakha the halachic midrashim are filled with derivations, like learning things out from the phrasing here, redundancy there. So if all the answers were known already, what's the point of what does the Talmud have to exist for? So the answer they came up with was, no, yeah, they knew the answers already. The midrashim, those aren't generating these halachot. They knew the halachot already. The midrashim are just connecting the halachot they already knew back to the written Torah. And so they argued about it because, what's the most elegant way to connect the oral Torah to the written Torah? Among the more extreme proponents of this position is Rabbi Shamson Raphael Hirsch, who makes the analogy between lecture notes and the lecture itself. And he says the written Torah is like the lecture notes. It's sparse, it's just you're jotting down a few key words when you hear a lecture. And since you were at the lecture, you look at the notes, you're like, oh yeah, like this little word here, that means like da-da-da-da-da. Because I was just taking quick notes. That's the written Torah. The written Torah is like God's lecture notes, God's cliff notes. Okay, the original cliff notes for the Torah is the Torah, according to Shem Hirsch. Okay, because what's the full lecture is the oral Torah, which is comprehensive and vast and contains thousands and thousands of rules and definitions. And the written Torah, that's like God's cliff notes. So you read it, and since you were at the lecture, you remember all that you remember. If you weren't at the lecture, you just read the written Torah. You're like, well, I don't know what this means. How could I practice this religion? You don't have enough details. It tells us to observe Shabbat, doesn't tell us how. Tells us to check the animals, doesn't define what that means. But we Jews, we have we are great grandfathers we're sat in the lecture, and so they told us and passed on for us the full information. So that's one of the spectrum. At the opposite end of the spectrum is the Malbim. The Malbim thinks that if we understood Hebrew grammar, biblical Hebrew, really, really well, we ourselves could recreate all of the halachic midrash. We could understand precisely what the rabbis did when they derived their tens of thousands of rules and definitions from the text of the written Torah. You're giving us this look like.
There's a lot of stuff that's not even mentioned. That's nothing to do with understanding the grammar of the text.
He begs to differ. So, and that's why he phrases his commentary on Shmot, and he wrote a commentary to the Midrash Halacha. And if you look at a Malbim on Shmot and Vayikra, you have on the page the Chumash, with Rashi, of course, because every Jewish printing of Chumash always has Rashi, from the beginning of printing until 1950. So it has the Chumash, it has Rashi, then it has the Midrash Halacha, and then it has his commentary, which is a commentary as much on the Midrash Halacha as it is a commentary on the Chumash itself. How did they derive this? Let me explain the sophisticated, deep grammar behind these midrashim. And he actually wrote an introduction where he says there are 613 rules of Hebrew grammar that animate the entire midrashic endeavor, 248 rules of grammar and 365 rules of verbs and their uses, or vice versa. Okay, so these are very symbolic numbers, of course, but he did it. That's what he came up with. And then he wrote a commentary based on that. So if you're a Malbimist, if you're a Malbimist, it's he wrote the book. There's nothing else no one ever else needs to write a commentary on the Torah, because if you really buy into his system, because he definitively explains it all. Yes?
I just want to make sure I understand. So he's basically saying that all you need is the written cliff notes. You don't need to be at the lecture.
Yeah, well, he would say, right, yes.
All you need is the Torah, and if you just look at the words, you don't have to be at the lecture, you don't have to know someone who's been at the lecture, there needs not even be a lecture, you can understand everything and derive from that what they've derivative. If
you know the grammar and the rules of grammar that they used, which he has been able to, feels he recovered. So the advantage of that point of view is, the Talmud and the Halachic Midrash is real, and you understand all the drama and the energy and what page after page of Gemara's discussion is all about, because what's the halakha? They didn't know. They had to figure it out by studying the Torah and figuring out what the words mean. So now it all makes sense. The risk of that is you're well, what is it? Is it convincing or is it not? And he was responding to Reform attacks on traditional rabbinic exegesis and Chazal. The early Reform movement was anti-Chazal, anti-rabbinic, anti-Talmud, because I think they felt that they had these corrupt readings that no normal person would read the Torah and think that's what it meant. And so they just invented all these rules based on their weird readings of Psukim. Later on, subsequently, in subsequent generations, very quickly actually, Reform movement came to embrace the rabbis and said they were the original reformers because they reinvented their religion to renew it, etc., in a time of transition, etc. But so he felt it was important to defend traditional Judaism to show how the rabbinic read of Chumash was not corrupt, but was actually a really compelling, sophisticated interpretation of Scripture. If you really understood the phrase, the pshat that accords with the true and clear rules of language is only to be found in the drash. So that's a quote. Pshat and drash, it's sort of the same, like omek pshat, right? The higher level pshat is in accordance with the drash. If you really know grammar, you know well, then these two are actually conflated. The plain sense meaning, the homiletic meaning, end up becoming the same. And his commentary on the Chumash is, at least the legal section of the Chumash, that's his agenda, that's what he's trying to do. Mm-hmm.
I have two questions.
Sure.
So, but the Chazal and the codification of the Talmud, right, which is one of the things that's being challenged by the Reform, which he's trying to protect, that's based on the Mishnah, not on the Torah. So what is the Mishnah in this case?
So the Mishnah, so the Mishnah is, I should come to the classes we had a few weeks ago. The Mishnah doesn't give us, the Mishnah just lists rules.
No, I mean sorry, I don't recognize, under the Malbim.
Yeah, so he would say, I'll tell you. Yeah. The Mishnah doesn't give you derivations, it just gives you very, it's like apodictic. It says, here's the law in case A, in case B, rule 1, rule 2, rule 3, without any. Right, and so when the Talmud is saying, how do we know this? It's from this, here's the derivation. So I think he would say the Talmud is recreating, look, the Talmud comes after the Mishnah, so for sure. So either the Midrash, so the Midrashim in the, either the Midrashim in the quoted in the Talmud are recreating the Midrashim that are the basis for the rules in the Mishnah, or they are the actual preservation of the, meaning, we actually don't know, we have, in terms of Tannaitic, from the time, we go back to the Tannaitic level, the generations of scholars of the Mishnah, they produced halachic midrash. We have early halachic midrashim of those generations of scholars, like the Sifra is pretty early, right? And we have the Mishnah. So we don't know which came first. But more or less the same groups of people produced the halachic midrashim, the early ones, and produced the Mishnah. So if the halachic midrash came first, then they derived the halachot through their drisha v'chakira, and then they put out a Mishnah, which was nice and user-friendly and easy for, if the Mishnah came first, then the midrashim, I guess, are sort of recreating or reimagining what could be the basis for the rules in the Mishnah.
So from where he sits, there's the Torah, and then the Mishnah and Midrashim and the Talmud, and everything that happened that man wrote, that's all clumped together, and that's all that can be derived from the Torah itself.
Exactly, which means that yes, precisely.
The Mishnah was before the Talmud or whatever. He's not only protecting the Talmud, he's also even protecting the Mishnah.
Yes, indeed. And that means that for him, when God gave Moshe, we say that, when we say, as rabbinic Jews, that the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, is also from God, what would that mean for the Malbim? I think that would mean God gave Moshe the written Torah, and then God gave Moshe a charge to go and interpret this. Maybe here are some rules of grammar that you might not know, or here are some maybe the homiletic, the exegetical principles of Rabbi Shmuel, or something of that sort. Here are some tools that you might use to interpret this written Torah that I just gave you, and I want you to do that. Maybe it could have been much more, maybe a handful of rules that are, we have a few things which the Talmud says, this is just Halacha Moshe Sinai. We don't know where this comes from. This is from Har Sinai, and that's it. There are a few, maybe, a few dozen cases like that. Shalom.
Would it be legitimate in his system to derive new rules of grammar and as a result, new halachot?
That's a great question. In theory, in theory, there really should be no limit to this process. If you're really convinced that you know, like, biblical Hebrew grammar as well as Chazal or similar to the way they did, why should there be any limit to that ability? So, and yet, at some point in Jewish history, people stopped doing that. So, I don't know if he would. I mean, I'm pretty sure he was a very conventional person, a halachist. I can't imagine he would have, engaged in his own creative midrashim that derive new rules that no one had ever thought of before. But from based on principle, in terms of what's religiously legitimate, I can't see any reason why, someone with his degree of confidence that he had recreated the process by which midrashim work, why couldn't you think of new ones? So this is my. Yeah, I don't.
And for the notion that each subsequent generation away from Har Sinai, thus the justification to codify things more and more, so that relationship of time and distance, more written, more codification. How would Malbim respond to that in terms of more grammar, less grammar, and that notion of the farther away we are, or is that just an excuse?
So the concept of
maybe even contrast that to what Simsel Raphael Hirsch would say, that idea of time from Har Sinai and the need to do.
So I'm not sure that there is a linear progression of that dynamic. I think there is an idea out there called Yuridat Dorot. The generations are lower in their statures as the farther we get from Sinai. One of the classic sources from that in the Talmud, I think, is a joke. It says, if they were like angels, we were like men. If they were like men, we are like donkeys. And not the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair, who was a really special donkey. Like, that's probably a joke, right? That's like I think I was taught that that's a humorous, like, add-on, right? Not just any, not the Chamor shel Pinchas ben Yair, because that would
literally and figuratively.
Right, so. So Yuridat wrote, it's interesting, somebody wrote an article that, Rambam doesn't, for example, doesn't believe in this. It seems pretty clear from his writings. It's not so at least Rambam, let's say, doesn't believe in this concept, which means that it's not a universal concept. I'm not sure that we, what evidence there is or is not for it. In terms of more codification as we go, I think actually the dynamic is like a cycle of codification, distillation, organization, followed by a explosion of interpretation. And so you have Yehuda Nasi, it's like all the material, all the Torah Sheba'al Peh that's floating around in the year 200, and it's a time of persecution, it's a time of whatever. I mean, there wasn't persecution when he was around, but maybe there was, they're worried about future persecution, or there had been persecution, whatever it was, whatever his rationale was, let me distill and edit and create like this beautiful thing called the Mishnah, and then immediately, okay, now we have the Mishnah. Let's ask questions. Why did he include this? Why did he not include that? This seems here in the Mishnah contradicts this other early source that's not in the Mishnah. Let's da-da-da-da. And then, we have several hundred years later the Talmud. And then you have, over the centuries, efforts to codify, to distill, to write the Torah, and the Shulchan Aruch, and then, and the Rambam also, they write these codes, each of which then becomes the launching pad for another round of interpretation and questions in it. So I see it more as like, you have a lot of material, you come at the end of a period of great creativity and creation, so let's distill and organize and prune and select so that I can produce something that is easier to study, that incorporates all that's been developed in the last few centuries. Then once you have that document, then that becomes the launching pad for future.
So it's a cycle. It's overly simplified.
I think it's a cycle.
It's a cycle, an ongoing cycle, and another topic where we are in that cycle right now. Don't answer that.
Yeah, okay.
That's a whole other tangent versus that very later.
Yeah, no, it is. So I'll tell you, I think where we are in that cycle, we're at the stage of, I think, the distillation and codification, because nobody's written a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch since the Mishnah Berurah, as far as to the best of my knowledge, like that type of commentary, like line by line, explaining, adding sources, new details. I think the Mishnah Berurah is the last one who did that. That was about 100 years ago. And since then, a lot of energy has been producing single subject books on topics in halakha. And that's like all the rage. Because what do? How do you write a book like that? You just let me read everything that's been said about this topic and reorganize it in nice chapters, organized in sub-chapters with nice footnotes and pretty cover, and there you go. And that's there are dozens and dozens of books like that on topics that you would never, it's become like a joke even, like the books that like Hagba and Lila Kehilchatan, like people write, like, it's, who knew, but like, yeah, okay, you can write a book, okay. So I don't know, so anyone here is up, yeah, Shalom.
Just really quick, I'm curious, what's the, I don't know if you know this offhand, but like, what's the most recent halakhic book that has been published with a commentary?
What do you mean by that?
In other words, like the standard format of like a sefer, it's like older because it's got a commentary around it. But some of the, obviously.
So you want to know what book in the middle is the oldest, as opposed to around the edges? Because there are all sorts of relatively recent. I mean, the Mishnah Berurah is a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, but you would mean the thing in the middle, which has the stuff around it. What's the oldest book that gets to?
The left. So is there a Mishnah Berurah? Sorry, the Mishnah Berurah is the Shulchan Aruch with the commentary.
Of the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is 20th century. Chafetz Chaim wrote a commentary, or his students wrote a commentary on, under his guidance, wrote a commentary on part of Shulchan Aruch, printed like on the page with the Shulchan Aruch. So the Shulchan Aruch in the middle with the Mishnah Berurah around the side. So you're asking what's the most recent book to merit getting printed in the middle of a page? Is that the question?
Exactly.
That's a really cool question. That's a cool question. It might be the Shulchan Aruch, which is like 400 years ago. Book to merit being in the middle of the page.
All right, well, I'm just wondering because, it seems like that would answer the question of like at what point are people starting?
Yeah, so that means that means we're no longer in that stage of history where we're sort of writing that kind of work. That's a great way of phrasing it. I'm trying to think if there's anything like more recently, like a 20th century work that has a commentary on it. They're classic. They're like really respected works of the 20th century halachists. I don't know that any have like earned their own commentary on them.
It's not just that the commentary.
I understand that. It's
that the commentary
is printed around it.
Publish a
Yeah.
Shulchan Aruch without commentary.
Right. No, I get it. Yeah. No, I understand. I get it. Yeah, that's cool. I don't know. We'll if I think it's like more recent than 400 years, I'll let you know. I'll let you know. So that's what we tried to do. I don't know that it changed the tide of history. I don't know that there are like Malbimists who feel that he definitively wrote the commentary on the Torah and it's all said and done. I don't even know if people who study like Midrash in university, if they take him seriously as a scholar in that way. But he was successful by his own endeavor. I just brought two examples from the beginning of this week's parsha, where you can sort of see how it goes that it's long. I mean, it's long. It's long, as you can see. This is the first two. This whole page is the first couple words of the parsha. So he had a lot to say. Well, just to get a sense, Deber b'nei Israel, speak to the children of Israel. Kvar bi'arnu, we already explained in Leviticus 7. She'achar sheharbei parshiot ein machlin deber el b'nei Israel im ken b'kol makom shechil deber el b'nei Israel ba'al ezimiyut. Okay, many parshiot, many sections of the Torah don't begin speak to b'nei Israel. So whenever it does say speak to b'nei Israel, that must be excluding some other category of people. Right? That's a linguistic comment, right? That's a pattern he noticed, and that the Midrash also was sensitive to. So perhaps it's to exclude people who aren't Jewish, or to exclude women, or to exclude converts. Amnan po yifshar lamar sheba lemeit akum delama nata lechayvan betumat migdash v'lo yadanu dedinei tuma v'biad migdash eino heg be'akum ferish zo katav b'yom hashmini yimol v'avad korbani oledet shebevadai eino heg be'akum. So it can't be to exclude non-Jews because the context of the verse makes clear that non-Jews are excluded anyway. So to bear b'nei Israel can't be to exclude non-Jews. ושפחות, דהאמר ישקי תזריע. ומבואר אצלנו שכל מקום שאנו ממתים גרים מן בני ישראל, הוא משום ופרשינן שבה מילת בני ישראל outside הדיוק, דווקא בני יעקב, ואז נשים וגרים בכלל. It can't be to exclude women because the verse says yishaki tazriya, and you can't exclude women who are maidservants or converts without excluding Israelite Jewesses either, and therefore B'nai Israel can't mean, the only way one excludes the maidservant and the convert woman is by saying B'nai Israel means the sons of Israel, not just the men, but it can't mean that here because the verse, right, so, okay. And it goes on. Okay, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, right? It's lengthy, but you get a sense of what he's doing, right? Here's a pattern: B'nai Israel, not B'not Yisrael. Okay, B'nai Israel means the sons, but it can't mean that here, so it must mean something else. Okay, the Be'er B'nai Israel usually excludes, but who's being excluded by this verse? And then, okay. And look at Isha Kidazriya, a woman who conceives and has a child. Kvar bi'arnu she'ivri yitzayen ha'ma'amar hatznai be'echad michamisha panim. Okay, so the conditional, I don't even say this in English, the conditional voice, tense, is expressed in Hebrew through one of 5 ways. Right? Isha ki tazriya, I would say, a woman that conceives, what is that ki being? So, achad, b'milat ki, bet, b'milat im, gimel, b'milat asher, dal, b'makor im shimush ha-bet, hey. Hapal habenoni im heyadiyah shetamo ketam asher. Okay, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so he's opening this. His interpretation with the conditional. The conditional is that what it's called in English, right? That's the grammatical. The conditional clause, whatever. The woman that conceives, if she does. Okay, so he opens up this discussion of this verse with this overview of here's how Hebrew grammar works. We already said this before. Let's say it again. 5 ways the conditional voice is used in Hebrew. Isha ki tazriya, a woman that conceives. That's what ki means. That's what's being used here. Why does it use this one of the 5? What's the nuances between them, etc., etc. Okay, so that's his agenda for all of the legal sections of the Torah. It's brilliant. It's madness. It's whatever it is. It's a masterpiece of scholarship, and that's what it is. And you can look at it. Okay. Yeah. He has what? He does have Yiddish in parentheses. Yes, in a few cases. Velcher. Do you know what that means?
Those are all the conditional words.
Oh, look at that. Yeah, it's not ki. Then, right? Exactly. Asher. Velcher. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Like which.
Which. Oh, cool. All right. Yeah, all right. So that's sort of interesting way. I guess that's a helpful way to convey the all right. So in preparation for this class, I asked some of my colleagues, what are your favorite Malbim? So I got a couple of answers back. So we have a few other things to say. But he wasn't just right about the legal sections of the Torah, also other things. So I got a recommendation for his commentary on Psalms. He has a long introduction to Psalms where he explains all the different reasons why it's hard to understand the Psalms. And the second reason, which is the one here, is I think if I understand correctly, is because they make reference to things that happened in the life of the author, and so if you don't know the thing they're referring to, it's hard to make sense of what the words mean. This is actually reminiscent of something that the Netziv in his introduction to the Torah, writes all the ways in which the Torah is similar to poetry. And one of the ways it's similar to poetry is sometimes poems allude to things that aren't explicit in the poem itself. And if you know what it's alluding to, you understand the poem. This is a silly example, but I don't know. But like American, what's the Bye Bye American Pie, right? Like every line is a reference to some historical event that happened in the 50s, right? So if you know that, you have the notes, the song makes sense. So the Netziv says the Torah is like that too, and part of what the oral Torah is doing is telling you this is what this is alluding to, etc. And so here the Malbim is saying it's really hard to make sense of the Psalms because it's poetic allusion to all sorts of things that happen that are hard to make sense of otherwise. You want to say something?
So the part that we just read,
where sure.
It distinguishes im, ashel,
yeah.
ki, to me it reminds a lot of how we say that there's no word that's used for no reason
yes.
in the Torah.
Yes.
And so he's putting a lot of meaning,
yes.
he's putting a lot of faith that the Torah was written by God.
Yes.
And so every single word, if we chose which as opposed to that,
correct.
There's a reason.
Correct. Not only,
that's kind of the reason.
yes, exactly. Thank you for pointing it out and making that explicit. That is true. Not only is every word from God and for a reason, he believes there are no true synonyms.
And nothing is redundant.
Nothing is no redundancy nor any real synonyms. And so if you have 2 different ways of saying the same thing, then in fact they're actually different. They're right.
By the way, I think when people write today in modern days, there are people in the world who believe that when they like.
They choose their words very
Right,
carefully.
They write the document, they choose the words so carefully that they choose one word
So-
versus the other because they don't think that anything is really synonymous.
Right, that's a high standard, I would say,
Yes.
of writing.
But it exists. But no, so my question is,
Yeah,
I think with Tehillim and with anything that's not the Chamsha
Yeah.
Torah, it's a little bit harder to say that we can interpret it as long as we know the code because the
Yes,
Chamsha
yes,
Torah,
yes.
there's perfection,
right,
right? However, people could make mistakes.
right.
And
right.
so whoever wrote the other stuff is acknowledged that it's people, right? We
Right.
need to know their context in order to understand
Correct.
and
No, he's
interpret.
down, yeah.
But it's also, you can also accept that they maybe have made a mistake when they chose one word and not the other.
Right. I wouldn't say mistake, I would just say not necessarily super precise, or there isn't omni-significance, like every,
It's not as perfect, it's not perfect.
or as significant, right? Not every word choice doesn't necessarily have meaning, whereas in the Chumash, he says every word choice does have meaning, and legal meaning. He's trying to unpack it there. He's definitely not going through this type of grammatical analysis of the non-legal sections of the other parts of Tanakh, for sure. I just want to also just say, since you brought it up, that his understanding of Chumash itself is also different from like what's commonly associated with Rabbi Yishmael in the Talmud, who is the advocate of Dibra Torah Kilshon Bnei Adam. The Torah uses human language, which at least in some ways is understood in the Talmud as saying language is conventional, the Torah uses conventional language, not everything is. Sometimes the Torah just, like the Torah mimics the way that human language isn't omni-significant, so not everything in the Torah is omni-significant. And there's a big clash, in the Talmud between the school of Rabbi Akiva and the school of Rabbi Yishmael, where Rabbi Yishmael is the, language is conventional, the Torah uses human language, not everything is, Rabbi Akiva says, no, every vav, every jot and tittle has meaning, and you can derive that meaning, you can understand that meaning and claim that meaning. Rabbi Yishmael is saying, Rabbi Akiva, you're what's the case? There's one case, he derived an additional death penalty that's not explicit in the Torah based on a vav, and Rabbi Yishmael says, you're going to kill this guy because of a vav? Like that's, that's a little too much, right? Is that not, okay, I think that's the very sharp example of that. Okay, another sort of example, a few other examples of his, just sort of breadth and depth. Okay, the next source here. This is from Genesis chapter 6. That talks about the Bnei Elohim, the children of God are on the earth. They're taking human wives, and the Nephilim, these giants, are in the land. This weird mythological story, and the Malbim says, this is actually a myth that lies under behind the early histories of the Egyptians and the Romans and the Greeks. They all believed that that their empires, their nation was founded by these half-gods and these, results of products between gods and people. And that's what these heroes of mythology came from. And seems very, I'm trying reading it outside because it's just long, but it's there. He's very aware of this mythology. And he says, it's not true, but that's what all of these different people say. And this episode in Genesis 6 is when people started making up that story, when the elite in society started claiming about themselves that they were the children of gods, they were half-gods, and that they had, godly parents.
Why is it in the Torah?
Because the Torah is saying this is when, the Torah's not saying this is what happened. The Torah is saying this is when people started claiming this is what happened. I think that's what he's saying. Let's look from the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 lines from the bottom. 2/3 aval. Aval da. You should know. Pay attention. Kol hasipurim v'hagadot. Ha'el. All of these stories. Sha'alehem banu kohanei elil kol yinei avodah zarah v'sipurei elilim v'hamitologia shalehem. All of these stories that their idolatrous practices and their worship and the mythology is all based upon hakol sheker v'chazeh. It's all lies and falsehoods. Hayaselo Adam Elohim v'hema lo Elohim. How could a person make a god without being God? Okay. Rak hema giborim Hashem me'olam ve'anshei Hashem shekol gibor shamad b'yimim hahem o ish yasalo shem ayidei chachmato u'masav hayu miyachasim lo Elohut v'hayu amrim shenafal mishamayim v'yu mesafrim alav niflot v'havelim harbei. So they're great people. Either they said about themselves or they attributed to them, our Pharaoh, our leader, Theseus, he's fell from heaven, or he, has a parent who's a god. And when did people start telling this type of story? The generation of the flood. ולעבודות הזרות והנוכריות והאמונות שווא והבל אשר לכן ראה השם לקצר ימי אדם שיראו כי אדם המה ובני תמותה ולא אלוהים המה. That's why God in that episode shortens their lifespan so that people would realize that everyone is mortal, all people are the same. You could be a wealthy person, whatever, a powerful person, you still die like everyone else. That's when the lifespans get shorter. So I think it's a fascinating, creative. It shows a sort of breadth of knowledge and sort of sophistication. It's kind of neat. Okay. Next, Reshit Kafbet. Okay. So this is talking about the Akedat Yitzchak, and here you see his use of grammar in a narrative section of the Torah. So he's going to explain. Maybe we'll just say this outside. The difference between a nisayon and a bechina, a test and a trial. Okay, so a bechina is to determine the character of something. What is its nature? What's Avram like? A nisayon is to determine the extent of something. How strong is it? Okay, so the bechina is what's Avram like? Does Avram fear God? The nisayon is, granted, now that we know that Avram fears God, how much? To level 6 or level 8 or level 11, okay? That's the nisayon. That's why we say there are 10 tests of Abraham, one after the other, because once you know a thing about Abraham, you have to, God is trying to figure out, or to demonstrate, let me turn it to 8, let me turn it to 9, let me turn it to 10, and that's why Hashem Nisad Abraham, that's why God is testing Abraham, because it's not a bechina. Bechina is, again, is he good, is he bad, does he fear God, is he not? The nisayon is, let me demonstrate just how the extent of. So the bechina is the what, and the nisayon is the how much. Okay, so that's, again, it's a grammatical distinction. It's two different languages, two different words the Torah uses, and he's sensitive to the nuance, and he's using it to explain a story in the Torah that, answering some questions about that. Okay, Shir Shirim. He wrote 2 commentaries on Shir Shirim that are printed together in his book on Shir Shirim, where he explains this story in 2 levels. He explains the plain sense levels of the story. There's a woman, and she had a lover, and she ran away 4 times or 5 times, and it's hard to. Shir Shirim. It's not so. It's very poetic. It's very hard to understand. What's the story? Who's going where? Who's talking to whom? What's actually going on? So he writes a very simple commentary that explains that. First of all, actually, he writes an introduction to his commentary on Shir Shirim, which is several pages long, and it all rhymes. It's really kind of neat. It's a rhyming narrative introduction to Shir Shirim. People, again, he wasn't, he wasn't hired for very long. He'd write these amazing, right? He wasn't maintaining a relationship. He wasn't doing board development, so he was writing these rhyming introductions to Shirim, where he explains what the book is about, what its meaning is. So he writes, again, one explanation of the story, the level of the story, this woman, she went here, she went there, what happened to her, the story of her relationship, and then he writes another, this is actually all a mashal, this is a metaphor for something else, and then he tells the story, focusing on that mashal and the metaphor. What's the metaphor that he focuses on? And he explains in one of the passages here. That's the Hakdamat to the Mitzvah. So you have on the bottom of this page here a passage from that description where the rhyming introduction where he says what the mashal is. The mashal for him is not unlike, he really follows Rambam in this, but in a which is significant. Right? The Midrashim, Midrash and Shir Shirim, the classic Midrashim, say that Shir Shirim, this love song in Tanakh, is a metaphor for the story of the relationship between God and the Jewish people. And so all of these verses are interpreted as stages in Jewish history, and it's, in the woman's breasts are the tablets of the law, and she ran away to this is this episode, this is that episode, and that's, you can read that's the art scroll, like the printed in the Siddur. That's Midrash Yeshrim, that's Rashi as well. Every line is an episode of Jewish history. It's a story, the song is a song of relationship between God and the Jewish people. Rambam, and also the Malbim says, no, the metaphor is the metaphor for the love of the soul for God. And I think what's nice about that, Rambam says as well, the love of he doesn't talk about the soul, he talks about a person's love for God. What's nice about that way of understanding the book, in contrast to the Midrash, in contrast to Rashi, is it allows you to see the love story of two individuals as being, like you can appreciate it on that level too without a contradiction. Like according to Rashi, if you focus on this woman and a man, there was never a woman, there was never a man, they weren't in love, it's not, that's just, it's the only characters, it's like God, but Rambam, and I think Malbim too, is saying, no, like this human love is a metaphor for the love that a person has for God. And so it's important to understand like what happens, like to sort of appreciate the romance of the story, the excitement, the tension, all of that is like there, it's part of the story, you appreciate it. It's all valuable, it's all well and good. And then you understand that passion like ought to exist or does exist between, where the soul yearns to be close to God. So I think and that's why I was able to write two commentaries, because like the stories are not like in contrast to each other, the stories are kind of parallel to one another. There's this episode, there's this woman, and and Shlomo himself, King Solomon, he like embodies both of these, because he was, on the one hand, like he had his like physical grandeur, he had 1,000 wives and a big palace and lots of nice food, presumably. So like his physical circumstances were very opulent and grand. And also he was like this devout religious person who built the Beit and wrote these beautiful prayers and wrote books of great Torah wisdom. And so not only does he, and so like both are true for him. The spiritual like yearning and also the physical opulence are true for him. So too this song is a song of physical love, of human love, and it's also a story of spiritual love as well. So that's a neat thing as well. And finally, he wrote an incredible, this commentary on Esther is really neat. Again, very, very long, okay? Like it's almost like it's almost like a book, right? It's almost like a book, like telling over, like as he has a whole analysis of the political machinations of Achashverosh, who was it starts off, you have to know that there is, actually put here, he writes, you have the different types of kings. There are kings who have legitimate rule, there are kings who come to power, there are kings who rule in a sort of with limited power, there are kings who are absolute monarchs. And Achashverosh, in the first chapter of the Megillah, under the scenes, he's orchestrating things to become absolute ruler. And Vashti was the one who had real yichus, right? He sort of got more power from marrying her. She was the princess, she had this independent authority. By making her come to his party, he's asserting his power over her. That's why she doesn't go. So he's able to get her out of the picture, and he's able to use, I think, her quote-unquote rebelliousness as a way to eliminate this rival to his of power. And then by sending out his messages to the kingdom, he's sort of asserting himself as the absolute ruler. And he puts his point, that's why he sends out messages in every single language, because by sending out messages to his empire in every single language, he asserts his own authority. If the messages all go out in Persian, then who's really in charge of the empire? Like Persia, right? It's the kingdom, it's the guy, he's just, the head of state. But if the messages go out in 127 languages, all from him, then who's in charge? It's not Persia, it's him, Achashverosh, as in his person. And so that's why this detail. So it's all, it's a very politically astute reading that, again, comes from a certain, in all his suffering and, and abuse by his communities and the fighting, he gained an appreciation of politics. All his travels around Europe and into Turkey, again, understood how the world works. And writes this very politically sophisticated commentary on Megillat Esther, where the politics and the religious message are all entwined. Like, if it were not for Achashverosh taking this power, he wouldn't have been able to marry Esther, right? Because if he weren't an absolute despotic monarch, he couldn't make all the eligible women in the kingdom come before him and pick the one he liked best. He could do that because in eliminating Vashti, he asserts and usurps all this power and arrogates all this power for himself. And so all these details of the story then become necessary for the unfolding of this miraculous end. So I think it's a really, really neat like a sort of a neat melding, I guess, of sort of the political and the religious. Again, lengthy though. It's not like his style is not, here's a word here, word there, comment here, comment there. It's like massive, like sort of paragraphs, essays, giving context and broader explanations for events. Okay, so that's the Malbim. Next week we do Sam Sofer, who is one of the pivotal figures in 19th century Jewish history. Was a great halachic scholar, a tremendous halachic scholar, who's really, his enduring legacy is as a halachist, but was also a very creative darshan and communal leader, and has been misunderstood by history, and we're going to hopefully understand him better. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.